My parents calmly explained, "This is just how estates work," while sliding papers across the table that removed my name completely. I read every page without comment. Later, when the lawyer asked one clarifying question in front of everyone, the room went uncomfortably quiet. My name is Amelia Grant. I am 31 years old, and until 18 months ago, I had spent the better part of a decade convincing myself that love looked like silence, sacrifice, and being the one who stayed. I stayed when my mother got sick. I stayed when my father stopped being able to pretend he could handle it. I stayed when my younger brother Daniel disappeared into himself, into bottles, into whatever crisis felt most urgent that month. I stayed, and I thought that meant something. I thought it would be remembered. It was remembered, just not the way I imagined. The table where they slid those papers was the same table where I had fed my mother during her last months, the same wood grain I had wiped clean after she could no longer hold a spoon steady. I knew every scratch on that surface. I had made some of them myself, moving medical equipment through the dining room because it was the only place with enough light for her to see our faces clearly. So when my father cleared his throat and my Uncle Charles, the family attorney, arranged the documents in a neat stack before pushing them toward me, I recognized the theater of it, the careful choreography. "They had rehearsed this," my father said. "We've made some adjustments to the estate plan. Your mother and I discussed it before she passed. This is just how estates work, sweetheart. It's not personal." I picked up the first page, then the second. Then I kept reading. Every clause, every subsection, every carefully worded paragraph that explained in the cleanest legal language that I was no longer a beneficiary of anything. Not the house I had lived in during my mother's illness. Not the savings account I had helped manage when my father's hands started shaking too much to write checks. Not the land that had been in our family for 3 generations. Nothing. Daniel sat across from me, and I could feel him trying not to look too comfortable. He was always better at the performance than I was. Our father sat at the head of the table like he was presiding over something important, something historical. Uncle Charles kept adjusting his glasses, a habit I had noticed years ago whenever he was nervous. I said nothing. Not because I was shocked. I want to be clear about that. I said nothing because I was watching. I had learned, through years of being the quiet one, that people reveal themselves most clearly when they think no one is paying attention. And in that room, everyone thought I was too stunned to notice the way Daniel's knee was bouncing under the table, the way my father kept glancing at Charles for reassurance, the way the family lawyer from outside our circle, a man named Mr. Hoffman, who had been brought in to witness the signatures, kept frowning at the documents like something did not sit right with him. I finished reading. I set the papers down. "Any questions?" my father asked. "No," I said. "I understand." And I did. More than they could possibly know. If you are watching this from somewhere with old family trees and long shadows, let me know in the comments where you are from. I think there is something universal about this. The way families turn legacy into a weapon, the way love becomes conditional the moment money enters the room. I have heard from enough people to know I am not alone in this, and if you are sitting somewhere right now, recognizing pieces of your own story in mine, I want you to know that I see you. Let me take you back, not to the signing, but to the years before it, the years that made me the kind of woman who could sit at that table and say nothing while her entire identity was being erased from the family record. I was 23 when my mother was diagnosed. Early onset dementia, complicated by a heart condition that made every day feel borrowed. The doctors gave her 5 years. She lasted 7, but those last 4 were not really living, they were waiting. I was a music teacher then. I had a small apartment near downtown Atlanta, a piano I had saved 2 years to buy, and a life that felt like it was just beginning to take shape. When my mother got sick, I moved home. Temporarily, I told myself, just until things stabilized. Things never stabilized. Daniel was 20 at the time, still in college, still finding himself. That was the phrase my parents used whenever anyone asked about him. He is finding himself, as if the rest of us had been handed maps at birth, and Daniel was simply taking the scenic route. I learned not to question it. I learned that questioning things in my family meant being labeled difficult, dramatic, ungrateful. So I stayed. I managed medications. I coordinated with hospice nurses. I learned to read the subtle shifts in my mother's breathing that meant she was scared, even when she could no longer say so. I held her hand through the nights when she did not recognize me, when she called me by her sister's name, when she looked at me with the kind of fear you only see in someone who knows they are losing themselves. My father checked out. Emotionally, I mean. He was still physically present, but something in him had broken the moment the diagnosis came, and he never quite put it back together. He would sit in his study for hours, staring at old photographs, and when I would bring him dinner, he would look at me like I was a stranger doing a kindness. Daniel visited on holidays, sometimes. When he did come, he was always the center of attention. My mother's face would light up in a way it never did for me. My father would suddenly become animated, telling stories about Daniel's potential, Daniel's future, all the things Daniel was going to do once he figured himself out. I would stand in the kitchen, preparing food no one would thank me for, and I would tell myself that this was just how families worked. That being the reliable one meant being invisible, that my reward would come later. I was wrong. The will, the original will, was drafted when I was 26. I know because I was there. Uncle Charles came to the house with a stack of papers, and I helped my mother through the process of explaining her wishes. She was still lucid then, still herself in the ways that mattered. I remember her holding my hand as she told Charles, "Amelia gets the house. She is the one who has been here. She is the one who will keep it together." I remember because those words became a kind of anchor for me in the years that followed. When the nights got long and my own life felt like a footnote to everyone else's story, I would repeat them to myself. She sees me. She knows. I did not know then that wills could be rewritten, that lucidity could be questioned, that the people you trust most can sometimes be the ones planning against you while you sleep in the next room. My mother died on a Tuesday in March. The hospice nurse called it peaceful. I was holding her hand when it happened. Daniel was in California, something about a job opportunity that never materialized. My father was in his study. I was the one who felt her grip loosen. I was the one who closed her eyes. The funeral was beautiful. Daniel gave a speech that made everyone cry. I sat in the front row and did not speak, because no one asked me to. 3 months later, we gathered at the house to discuss the estate. I assumed it was a formality. I assumed I would sign some papers, receive the keys to the house I had already been living in for 7 years, and begin the slow process of rebuilding a life I had put on pause. I assumed wrong. The moment I saw the documents, I knew something had changed. The formatting was different, the date was different, and most importantly, my name was no longer anywhere on the pages that mattered. I asked Charles about it later, privately. I kept my voice calm because I had learned that calmness was the only way to be taken seriously in my family. Emotion meant weakness. Weakness meant dismissal. He told me, "Your mother changed her mind near the end. She felt Daniel needed the stability more than you did. You have always been so capable, Amelia, so independent. She knew you would be fine." I nodded. I thanked him for explaining. Then I went home, and I started looking. Here is what people do not understand about being the quiet one in a family. You are invisible. Yes, but invisibility comes with access. I had been in every room of that house. I had organized every filing cabinet. I had transferred every document to digital storage when my mother could no longer keep track of paper. I knew where the records were because I was the one who had created the system. And I knew in my gut that something was wrong. It took me 2 weeks to find the first piece of evidence, an email chain between Daniel and Charles that predated my mother's death by nearly a year. The subject line was simple: restructuring. The contents were less simple. Daniel had been working on this for months, long before my mother's mind started slipping, long before anyone could claim she was not competent to make decisions. He had been having conversations with our uncle about how to redirect the estate. The emails were careful, legally cautious, but the intent was clear. They were planning to cut me out. One line stayed with me. Daniel had written, "She is not going to fight. She is too tired. She is too focused on taking care of everything to notice until it is done." He was almost right. I want to pause here because I think it is important. If any part of this is resonating with you, if you have ever been the one who stayed while others left and then watched those same people collect the rewards, just drop a comment. Say something, even if it is just a word, because I spent years thinking I was the only one, and I have learned since then that there are more of us than anyone wants to admit. After I found the emails, I could have confronted them. I could have screamed, accused, demanded answers. That is what they expected, I think. That is why they had been so careful to frame everything as my mother's decision. They were prepared for an emotional reaction. They were not prepared for silence. I kept looking. The second piece of evidence was a voicemail. My mother had left it on my old phone, the one I had replaced a year earlier but never thrown away. I found it while going through boxes in the garage, looking for anything that might help me understand what had happened. Her voice was thin, tired, but unmistakably hers. The message was from 8 months before she died. Amelia, I keep forgetting to tell you this, and I do not want to forget. The house is yours. I told Charles. I told your father. It was always supposed to be yours. You are the one who stayed. I love your brother, but you are the one who stayed. I sat in that garage for an hour, listening to the message over and over, not because I needed proof. I had proof. I sat there because I needed to hear her voice again. I needed to remember that she had seen me, even when no one else did. The third piece of evidence was the most damning. My mother kept a journal during her illness, a small leather notebook where she wrote down things she was afraid of forgetting. I had given it to her as a gift when the diagnosis came, thinking it might help her hold on to herself a little longer. After she died, my father had taken it, saying he wanted something personal to remember her by. I found it in his study, tucked behind a row of books he never read, and in the margins, in her handwriting, were notes that contradicted everything Charles had told me. Make sure Amelia knows the house is hers. Charles keeps pushing for changes. I do not understand why. Daniel called again. He says he needs security. I told him Amelia has given enough. The last entry was dated 2 weeks before she died. Her handwriting was shaky, barely legible, but I could make out enough. Something is wrong. They are not listening to me. Tell Amelia. She had tried. In her own way, with her failing mind and her weakening voice, she had tried to protect me, and they had waited her out. I made copies of everything. The emails, the voicemail, the journal. I contacted a lawyer outside the family, a woman named Patricia Okonkwo, who specialized in estate fraud. I told her everything, showed her everything, and I asked her one question. Can this be undone? She looked at the evidence for a long time. Then she looked at me. Yes, she said, but it will not be easy, and it will not be quiet. I told her I had been quiet long enough. Here is the part of the story where I almost walked away. It was a Thursday night, 3 weeks before the estate signing. I had everything I needed. The evidence was organized, the lawyer was ready, the case was strong. Patricia had told me we could file an injunction the moment the papers were signed, freezing the assets before Daniel could touch them. But that night, I stood in the doorway of my childhood bedroom, looking at the boxes I had packed. Everything I owned fit into 6 cardboard boxes and a suitcase. My entire life, reduced to things I could carry. I thought about what it would mean to fight. The court dates, the accusations, the way my family would look at me when they realized what I had done. I thought about Daniel's face at our mother's funeral, the tears that had seemed so genuine. I thought about my father, broken and distant, and whether this fight would break him further. And I almost left. I almost walked out of that house, got in my car, and drove until Georgia was just a memory in my rearview mirror. I almost let them have it, all of it, because the alternative felt like too much weight to carry. There was a moment, standing in that doorway, when I genuinely believed that walking away was the stronger choice, that holding on to the truth would only poison me, that letting go was a form of freedom. Then I remembered something Daniel had said to me years ago during one of his low points. He had been crying on my couch, talking about how hard his life was, how nothing ever worked out for him. You always land on your feet, Mel, he had said. You do not understand how it feels to fall. At the time, I had comforted him. I had made him tea and told him things would get better. I had believed, genuinely believed, that he was struggling and that my job was to help. But standing in that doorway, I realized something. He had said that to me while I was working 2 jobs to pay for his rehab. He had said that to me while I was sleeping 4 hours a night because our mother needed round-the-clock care. He had said that to me as if my landing on my feet was effortless, as if the ground did not hurt every single time I hit it. He did not see my falls because he was never there to witness them. And he had used my resilience as justification for taking everything else. I unpacked my boxes. I stayed. The day of the signing came, and I walked into that dining room knowing exactly what would happen. I knew they would slide the papers across the table. I knew my father would say something about how estates work. I knew Daniel would avoid my eyes while trying not to smile. I signed everything. Every page, every clause, every document that removed my name from the family legacy. I signed it all with a steady hand and a neutral expression. Then Mr. Hoffman, the outside lawyer, did something unexpected. He had been quiet through the whole process, occasionally shuffling papers, occasionally making notes, but after I signed the last page, he looked at me directly. "Just to confirm," he said. "Miss Grant, are you aware that this document fully revokes your share of the estate? Was that your intention?" The room went still. I could feel Daniel's panic before I saw it. The slight shift in his posture, the sudden tension in his jaw. My father started to speak, something dismissive about how this was all settled, but Hoffman held up a hand. "I am asking Miss Grant." I met his eyes, and for the first time that day, I smiled. "Not exactly," I said, "but it will do for now." I did not explain. I simply stood up, thanked everyone for their time, and walked out of the house. Behind me, I could hear Daniel's voice rising, asking what I meant, demanding to know what was happening. I did not turn around. What none of them knew was that Patricia had filed the injunction that morning. By the time they finished arguing about my strange response, the assets were already frozen. The house, the accounts, the land, all of it locked in legal limbo pending investigation. The next few months were not easy. I will not pretend they were. Daniel hired his own lawyer. My father stopped speaking to me entirely. Uncle Charles sent a series of letters, first threatening, then pleading, as the evidence mounted against him. The family I had sacrificed so much for closed ranks against me, painting me as bitter and greedy and ungrateful. But the evidence was clear. The emails showed premeditation. The voicemail showed my mother's true wishes. The journal showed her resistance, her confusion, her attempts to protect me even as her mind failed her. And when the forensic accountant Patricia brought in discovered that Daniel had already begun transferring money from the estate accounts he should not have had access to until the papers were fully processed, the case went from strong to devastating. The court ruled in my favor, not immediately, and not without resistance. There were hearings and depositions and moments when I genuinely believed I might lose. But Patricia had been right. The evidence was too clear, the manipulation was too documented. And the judge, an older woman with gray hair and sharp eyes, looked at my uncle with a disappointment that felt almost personal when she delivered the verdict. "Undue influence," she said. "Clear and documented. The amended will is hereby invalidated. The original estate plan, as drafted in the presence of the decedent, while she was demonstrably competent, will be honored in full." Daniel lost everything he thought he had already won. The house went to me. The accounts reverted to their original designations. The land, 3 generations of family history, was placed in my name alone. Uncle Charles was disbarred, not just for what he did to our family, but because the investigation uncovered a pattern. Other clients, other families, other quiet people who had been pushed out of their inheritances by a man they trusted. My case became the first domino in a series that eventually brought down his entire practice. My father sent me a letter, a few months after the verdict. I read it once, then put it away. He did not apologize, he explained. He told me that he had been confused, grieving, that Daniel had assured him this was what my mother wanted. He asked if we could find a way to move forward. I have not responded yet. I do not know if I will. Some bridges do not need to be rebuilt. Some distances exist for good reason. Daniel has not contacted me at all. I heard through distant relatives that he moved to the West Coast, that he is working in some startup, that he tells people he chose to walk away from the family estate because he did not want the drama. I do not correct these stories. He can have his narrative. I have my truth. I live in the house now, the same house where I fed my mother, where I held her hand as she forgot my name, where I signed papers that were meant to erase me completely. I have painted the walls. I have ripped up the carpet in the dining room, replaced it with hardwood that does not hold memories of medical equipment and betrayal. I have made it mine in ways that feel like healing. On the wall of my bedroom, I have hung a frame. Inside is the original will, the one my mother drafted, when she still knew exactly who she was and who she loved. My name is there, in her handwriting. Amelia gets the house. She is the one who stayed. The house is quiet now. I have started teaching piano again. a few students from the neighborhood who come on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. Their music fills the rooms that used to be filled with hospital sounds, and sometimes I catch myself smiling at nothing in particular, at the light through the windows, at the simple fact of being here. I kept the house. Not because I wanted to take something from my brother, not because I needed to prove a point to my father. I kept it because it was always supposed to be mine, because my mother said so, because I stayed, and staying should mean something. If you are still watching, still listening, I want to thank you for being here. This is not an easy story to tell, and I imagine it is not an easy story to hear. But I think there is value in saying difficult things out loud, in letting the truth exist somewhere other than your own head. So if you made it this far, consider subscribing. Leave a like if any part of this landed somewhere real. And if there was a moment that stuck with you, a line or a scene or a feeling, drop it in the comments. I read them all. I may not respond to everything, but I read every single one. Because I know what it feels like to be the one who is never asked to speak. And I want you to know that here, at least, your voice matters.